the recently passed outdoor grow ban, are you going to be the enforcement entity? I guess you would have to be because it's in the city. Are you going to be going around enforcing, the grow ban? And what will you do if you find an outdoor grow that's in violation of the ordinance?
So, city's code enforcement falls under public safety. It didn't always, but many years ago it transferred over to here. So we have code enforcement officers or community service officers who actually enforce city code. And a lot of that is complaint driven. So neighbor to neighbor picks up the phone and says, hey, there's been a trailer parked on my street for a week, and can you do something about it? There's a vehicle that's been here for 2 weeks, and 72 hours is a length of stay for not an abandoned auto statute. And so is there something you can do about that? Marijuana will be no different. A lot of times because the marijuana is grown out of sight, which is also what the law required where it is legal to grow outdoors, it's supposed to be out of sight, that if a neighbor calls and says, hey, there's marijuana plants growing, then like any code violation, we would go and investigate and deal with it. Most of our code enforcement, because of the totality of codes and because of the number of citizens, is more complaint-driven than it is proactive. So you won't see public safety peering over fences to try to count and see whether there's plants or no plants. But if someone files a complaint, we would certainly be investigating the complaint like anything else. And I say that because council may change their plan. Currently, they're evaluating whether they want to go to a more proactive code enforcement program as opposed to more complaint-driven. Some communities like the complaint-driven because it's neighbor to neighbor getting along with your neighbor versus big brother, coming in and telling you what you should or shouldn't do.
Is there a distinction between outdoor and, say, in a greenhouse?
So currently outdoor, they've made no exceptions for greenhouses. So per the code, outdoor means outdoor. And so if it's being grown in a greenhouse, council didn't make an exception. They certainly considered it at one point to say that. But greenhouses sometimes don't really protect all of the odors. There's some standards as far as building code that might have to be looked at. And so I think they just left that alone.
So does that mean it is illegal to grow in the greenhouse?
Currently.
Okay.
Really?
So when I say greenhouse, that's a broad interpretation. So
okay,
a plastic wrapped building would be a greenhouse. And
let's say you went to the building department and you got a building permit and you built a greenhouse, an approved structure that meets building codes and things of that nature. Would that then still be an outdoor grow?
My understanding currently is yes, that would still be considered. And council did evaluate the possibility of granting an exception to outdoor grows to include greenhouses.
Well, let me ask that in another way. Now, my interpretation of a greenhouse is you've got probably glass walls, you've got a glass or plastic roof. That seems to me to be indoors as opposed to something that's exposed to the sun and the wind and the rain. So why, just because your house that you're growing things in, it still has a roof and walls, why, just because the walls are transparent, why is that not indoors?
Because a greenhouse really typically, and again, we're getting into a broad category, isn't sealed like a house or an indoor structure would be per code. So you're not really protecting from the reasons why council was considering, in my opinion, the outdoor grow issue as I heard it. Still not protected from theft issues, still doesn't really encompass the odor issue. And so for all the reasons they were concerned about the outdoor grows, a greenhouse doesn't give you more of that. Maybe it's a little less of the smell, but it's not something that's a tight sealed structure like something that's built to code, like a building, a house, garage, something like that.
Interesting.
So you do have discretion, some discretion. Let's suppose that a police officer goes to some place and he can see there are marijuana plants growing in a greenhouse or just outside of a greenhouse. And for some reason, there's absolutely no odor at all. Well, now what happened?
So the code doesn't ask us to measure the odor.
You can't. How could you?
The code says
no outdoor
grows. So we won't get into and it's a slippery slope deal. Once you start to say, well, this one really doesn't smell that bad, so I'm going to make an exception here, we start getting into a real objective area that's not necessarily something that I think we want to get into. So if we're called and somebody's complaining and we go investigate and it meets the outdoor criteria, then basically it is in violation.
Let me put it in another way. Let's suppose that somebody has a house and they're growing indoors and they've got 2 windows open and the wind is blowing right through the house into their neighbor's open window. Well, that could be pretty smelly. It could be.
Yeah. Yeah, what do you do in that case if the neighbor is complaining of the smell and yet you're technically meeting the requirements of the ordinance? What do you do in that case?
That's a tough one where actually, like we do any time where we feel like we're not clear on the ordinance and whether or not it clearly is a violation, we would consult with the city attorney to, I have that at times with noise ordinances. Someone feels like the noise is infringing on them, and so we look at the decibel levels and we look at the use and the zoning and all the different things, and we get the city attorney, and a lot of times we try to get people to figure out how we might mitigate the circumstance. It's possible that the code then could be expanded. The city's also looking at its nuisance code right now and stuff, and some of those have to do with trash and smells and things like that do infringe on neighbors and neighbors' rights and stuff. So I could see that maybe actually being included, for that purpose. The idea is that we figure out how to live amongst ourselves without infringing on each other's rights or abilities, and if the odor and the smell starts to do that, it's exactly why the council, I think, felt like they needed to ban the outdoor grows, especially in those residential areas where people are trying to get along. It's the music issue. We get if we don't get there to tell somebody to turn on the music, you got two people out fist fighting and stuff. Mm-hmm. And people get agitated enough over time because the livability becomes so stressful. So that's kind of how we make everybody play nice in the sandbox and get along without having those kind of issues.
Barking dog.
Barking dog. That's an excellent one. Yes.